The lion attacked me during the safari, and man, to this day when I tell how I managed to escape, no one believes me. They stare at me with that face like, no way, or you're messing with me, but I know what I lived through. I felt the ground shake when it ran. I saw its gaze locked onto mine as if it had already decided I was going to be its dinner, and man, nothing, absolutely nothing prepares you for being in the crosshairs of a wild predator in the middle of nowhere, far from any kind of help. Your heart beats like it's going to rip out of your chest. Your mind freezes, your feet lock up, and everything you thought you knew about courage turns to dust. And the worst part, I hadn't done anything wrong. It was just another tour, another ordinary day on a dream trip. But there, in that dry and silent patch of Africa, everything turned into a nightmare in a matter of seconds. The situation was clear. We had invaded its space, even if unintentionally. There was no provocation, no shouting, no sudden movement, nothing. The lion was just there, watching, quiet, and out of nowhere it came. Like lightning, as if something inside it had flipped a switch. And then my brother, what was a tour turned into a race for survival. I wasn't an experienced adventurer, didn't know survival techniques, had no weapon, no spray, no guide by my side, nothing. Just me and the instinct not to die there. And as impossible as it seems, I escaped. But the way it all happened, it was so absurd, so out of the ordinary, that to this day I wonder how I'm still here to tell this story. There was no helicopter rescue, no park ranger, no superhero. What saved me was a surreal mix of desperation, immediate reaction, and a massive dose of luck. Or destiny, I don't know. I was running, fleeing for my life when I thought it was over. When my feet slipped, my body flew through the air, and I thought it was the end. But that fall, which seemed like my last move in this world, was exactly what saved me. Sounds crazy. Just wait to hear how it happened. Because man, this isn't the kind of thing you make up. And the creepiest part is that afterward, when I reunited with the group, no one could understand how I was still alive. How I had escaped a direct lion attack with nothing to defend myself, no one around, and still came back alive. Some people cried. Others were speechless for minutes. And to this day, when I tell the story, some laugh nervously or go completely silent, not knowing what to say. Now tell me something. What would you do if a wild lion was coming straight at you and the only escape route led you to a place that might be even more dangerous? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and that's when the story really begins. Thanks a lot for being here with me, seriously. Before anything else, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you today, man, it's one of those stories you never forget. It was one of the most insane moments of my life, and even now, every time I tell it, people are left speechless. And no, it's not an exaggeration. You'll understand. Now let me explain exactly how it all happened. I've always been the kind of guy who needs some time to breathe between life phases. I was never one of those people who take everything on autopilot, living in pilot mode, you know. So after a really rough period where everything seemed out of control, the end of a long relationship, major burnout at work, and the feeling that I was living on repeat with nothing new happening, I decided I needed to stop, even if just for a few days, just to reconnect with myself. It wasn't some coach talk or self-help stuff. It was just that inner feeling that if I didn't change my surroundings, I'd end up sinking even deeper. That's when, on some random night after a few beers and many tabs open in my browser, I stumbled upon one of those safari trips through Tanzania. And that hit me hard. The image of a sunset in the savannah with elephants in the background and that vast silence. Man, that seemed like a world completely different from my chaos. And that was exactly what I wanted. A place where no one knew me, where time had a different rhythm, where I could hear the sounds of nature and not phone notifications. I planned for a few weeks, saved up some money that was just sitting there, and booked through an agency that specialized in experiences in Africa. They took care of everything: flight, lodging, transportation, local guide. I just had to show up with an open mind. And that's how in mid-April I landed in Arusha, a city in northern Tanzania, already feeling that air of adventure. The airport was small, smelled of wet earth, and had that stifling heat that hugs you immediately. On the way to the hotel, the driver explained that the region was known as the gateway to the Serengeti and Ngorongoro, two of the most famous conservation areas on the continent. He spoke with such genuine pride that I started to feel like I'd made the right choice. For the first time in months, I was excited about something. The next day, we met with the group that would be doing the safari together. There were 7 of us in total: me, an older English couple, a mother and daughter from New Zealand, a Canadian photographer who never let go of his camera even during breakfast, and a local guide named Juma. Juma was tall, slim, with a sun-weathered face and a steady yet calm gaze. He spoke English with a heavy accent, but it was easy to understand. And the craziest part was how well he knew every inch of that place. He didn't use GPS or anything, just drove through the dirt trails like it was his backyard. And we trusted him. There wasn't much choice, really. In the Jeep, the rule was clear. Don't get out, don't shout, don't make sudden movements. The Savannah wasn't a park, it was wild territory, and we were just visitors. The first few days were amazing, truly. We'd wake up early before sunrise to catch the animals at their most active, seeing a herd of elephants cross the road, hearing the distant roar of a lion in the dark, watching wildebeest move en masse. It was like being inside a documentary. And the silence was the craziest part. A silence you don't find anywhere in the city. A silence full of life with nature's background. Sounds like the world was breathing at its own pace there. Slowly, I felt my mind start to slow down. That weight I had on my chest started to make room for a lightness I didn't even remember existed. The group itself was pretty chill. The English couple mostly kept to themselves, taking photos and jotting notes in a notebook. The mother and daughter had a sweet, curious vibe, always asking about the animals, the plants, the local stories. The Canadian photographer was more reserved, but you could tell he was a good guy. We chatted a bit about hiking past trips, and he showed me some insane shots he'd taken in Nepal and Patagonia. But the strongest connection I made was with Juma himself. During breaks, we'd talk about his life, how he became a guide, and the deep respect he had for the animals and the land. He told me that everything there was about balance, that nature always gives signs before it acts, and that most tourists' mistake is ignoring those signs. And it was on one of those quiet days that everything started to shift in a strange way. We left camp earlier that day because Juma wanted to take us to an area where, according to him, a new lion pride had been spotted. It was a slightly more remote region, less visited, but he knew it well. The group was buzzing with excitement, especially the photographer, who was eager for a striking shot. The Jeep cut through low vegetation, and the sun was still rising, casting a golden light over everything. It was such a beautiful landscape, it looked like a painting. And that's when the mood began to shift. First, the sounds. The birds that usually sang cheerfully were silent. Then the movement. No animals nearby, no wildebeest, no zebras, nothing. Just that silence. But it wasn't the same as before. It was a tense silence, like something was about to happen. Juma slowly stopped the car, looked around, and asked us to be completely silent. He got out of the front seat and climbed up the side of the Jeep, binoculars on his face, trying to spot something ahead. After a few seconds, he spoke quietly, saying we needed to go back. He said there were signs of strange movement, recent tracks, and it was best to turn around. No one questioned him. But when he tried to start the engine, nothing. The car wouldn't start. He tried again. Still nothing. And then, as if choreographed, we heard a sharp crack, a branch breaking. All eyes turned to the same spot, and there he was. A huge male lion with a thick mane and eyes locked on us. He wasn't growling, wasn't roaring, just watching. But the way he looked at us, it wasn't normal. It was like he was deciding. The tension at that moment was unbearable. No one was breathing right. Juma tried to stay calm, telling us not to move, that the animal would probably lose interest. But it didn't. On the contrary, it started to approach, slowly but with purpose. Every step felt like a punch in the gut. And then when it stopped about 30 meters from the Jeep, something unexpected happened. But that I still can't tell. When it took that first step toward us, there were no screams, no panic, just the suffocating silence of people who know time is about to stop. Juma stood still, staring intently, trying to assess what to do, but his eyes gave away that there weren't many options. The lion wasn't just curious, it wasn't just marking territory. This was an advance, a warning that we had crossed an invisible line that should never be crossed. It walked with calculated slowness, like it knew fear was already doing the work for it. And as it got closer, I felt my legs locking like every muscle in my body was going into suspension. The jeep was still dead, and Juma, with his hand discreetly extended to the side, gave me an almost imperceptible signal to stay down. But I couldn't move. It was like my body had disconnected from my brain. The lion stopped about 20 meters from us. It stood still for a few seconds that felt like hours. Its mane swayed in the faint wind, eyes narrowed like it had already chosen who would go first. There was no movement inside the jeep, no heavy breathing, no visible trembling hands, just the muffled sound of wind brushing through dry leaves and the dead engine. And then, in the blink of an eye, it charged. Not trotting, running. And that's when everything exploded at once. The mother screamed, the daughter fell off the bench. The photographer tried to raise his camera. Juma turned to the steering wheel in one last desperate attempt to start the engine, and I ran. No thinking, no planning, not knowing where I was stepping. I yanked open the side of the jeep and threw myself out like that would give me some advantage. It wasn't courage, it was pure instinct. I just wanted to get away to distance myself from the target between me and the lion. I ran through the low vegetation, dodging dry bushes and fallen tree trunks, feeling the uneven ground pulling me sideways. My heart was like a drum in my throat. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew it was coming. The sound of paws on soil, its breathing, branches breaking. Everything seemed inches behind me. And then the terrain started to change. The vegetation grew denser, the ground more sloped. I was unknowingly going downhill. It wasn't until my foot sank into a hole covered with leaves that I realized I was in dangerous terrain, and before I could react, I slipped. My feet lost contact with the ground and my body was flung forward, slamming into a thick, dry, slanted trunk, like it had been waiting for someone to fall. The trunk snapped under my weight. It wasn't very high, maybe 2 meters off the ground, but the impact made me spin in the air and fall sideways down a slope of loose earth. I rolled, literally rolled like a sack of potatoes, out of control, hitting rocks, branches, roots. My arm scraped a huge thorn. I split my eyebrow against a low branch and only stopped when my body slammed sideways into a natural crevice between 2 large rocks. It was like a crack in the earth just over a meter wide but deep enough to hide me. I stayed there, curled up, trying to breathe dust filling my nose, my vision blurred from the blood running down my forehead. And then, the silence returned. That eerie, tense, charged silence. But this time I knew it might mean the lion was right above me, just waiting for the right move to strike. I didn't move. Inside, I was screaming. Everything hurt. My shoulder felt dislocated, my leg scratched down to the shin, and my chest rose and fell out of rhythm. But I didn't move. I remembered what Juma had said before, that some predators lose interest when prey stops moving. I clung to that like a lifeline, and everything stayed quiet for a good few minutes, until I heard it. Above me at the edge of the crevice, the muffled sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow steps. The lion had followed me there. The ground shifted slightly, stones fell. It was there, right above me. And then came the sound. A deep growl, long like thunder, muffled in its throat. I felt the air freeze in my lungs. It growled again. And then, nothing. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe half an hour. But I didn't move. Only when the sound of the footsteps slowly faded did I finally breathe. For real. Even then I stayed there motionless, trying to figure out if it was real or if I was hallucinating. Slowly, the adrenaline gave way to pain. Every part of my body felt like it had been run over. I was shaking, sweating, tasting blood in my mouth. But I was still alive, and that was all that mattered. I didn't have the strength to get outright away. I stayed curled up a while longer until I was sure the danger had passed. Only then did I start to slowly climb the side of the crevice, grabbing onto roots and holes until I could lift myself enough to see the trail above. The landscape was empty. No sign of the lion, no sign of the jeep, no one. And that's when it hit me. I was alone. in the middle of nowhere, injured, disoriented, but alive. And as absurd as it sounds, what saved me was slipping tumbling down the hill like a rag doll and landing in that crevice. What seemed like my end ended up being my shelter. If I had kept running straight, if I hadn't tripped on that rotten log, if the branch hadn't broken, I wouldn't be here now telling this. Sometimes it's in the mistake that we find the chance to survive. Nature is cruel, blunt, and doesn't forgive distraction. But that day it seemed to give me a way out. I still wonder if it was luck, instinct, or something greater. The pain kept me awake. The wounds burned, the cut on my forehead slowly dripped down my face, but nothing was worse than the uncertainty. Where were the others? The Jeep Juma, had anyone seen where I ran? Was the lion still nearby? I needed to find a way back. But the sun was already high, the heat was starting to scorch, and my vision was still blurry. Even so, with my body wrecked and my mind on high alert, I got up, brushed off the dust, and started walking. I had no idea which direction was right. But one thing I knew, I needed to get out of there. And with every step, even with fear still pulsing inside me, I felt something strange, like I had crossed an invisible line between who I was and who I was about to become. The first thing I felt as I started walking was a mix of confusion and urgency. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck, and every step was a challenge. My legs were shaky, my face sweating more than the heat justified, my breathing short. But I had to keep going. I needed to find some sign, some clue, anything to show I wasn't alone in that God-forsaken place. But there was no trail, no engine noise, no human voice. Just that dense silence and the tree shadows spinning as the sun climbed the sky. I walked for a time I couldn't measure, maybe an hour, maybe 3, stumbling, falling, leaning on branches and rocks until I heard it. Far off, faint, but it was the sound of an engine, a steady, intermittent noise that seemed to come from behind a hill. And in that moment, that sound meant everything. I headed in that direction even without knowing if it was the best choice. The terrain sloped upward, and every step brought a new kind of pain. My right arm barely moved, my mouth was dry like I hadn't had water in days, and my head throbbed like a drum inside. But the noise got louder, until when I reached the top of the rise, I leaned on a rock and saw down below the Jeep. Parked in an open field, hood up, and Juma standing beside it, scanning the area with one hand over his face like he was looking for something. I screamed. I screamed with everything I had, with a voice that seemed to come from deep inside. He looked immediately, and for a second he just stood there. When he saw me stumbling down, he ran toward me like his life depended on it. The moment we met was intense. He caught me just before I collapsed, looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. I tried to speak, but my mouth barely obeyed. He took me to the car, gave me water, tore pieces from his shirt to stop the bleeding from my forehead, and only then told me they had seen the lion, that it had wandered off after the commotion, but no one knew where I'd ended up. The whole group had gone back to camp thinking the worst had happened. He was the only one who didn't accept that idea. He said something inside him told him to search one more time, and if it hadn't been for that, I might have spent the night out there, maybe not making it. That shook me, not just because of the relief, but because of how it all played out. There was no plan, no hero, no epic ending. There was instinct. There was desperation. There was that insane will to live even when everything seemed lost. The drive back to camp was almost silent. I was exhausted, in a kind of automatic state, just trying to keep my eyes open. When we arrived, the group's reaction was surreal. The mother cried. The photographer dropped his camera. The girl was in shock. No one could speak properly. It was as if my presence there was impossible. But I was there, wounded, dirty, drained, but whole. The following days, they took care of me with improvised bandages, light food rest, and that feeling that the worst was behind us. I was kept under observation at the park's medical center before being taken back to the city, and only after a few days did I manage to board a flight back to the United States. Back home, over time, the marks started to fade. The physical ones, at least. The cut on my forehead became a scar. The scratches healed. But what really stayed was something else. A vivid memory etched in me of everything I saw, felt, and learned in that place. I'm no longer the same guy who went on that trip looking for silence. What I found was something else. I saw how fragile life is, how much we think we have control over everything, and don't. And I also saw how in the middle of chaos the body and mind will do whatever it takes to survive. I rolled down a hill, hid in a crevice, came face to face with death. And I'm here, telling this story. Today, when people ask me what was the most striking part of the trip, I don't even hesitate. It wasn't the elephants, or the sunsets, or the starry Savannah sky. It was that moment, that decision to run, that fall that seemed like the end and became salvation. Sometimes you need to fall to save yourself. Literally. And it may sound cliche, it may sound like a movie, but it was real. And even if no one fully believes it, I know what I lived. And I'll never forget. And you? What would you have done in my place with a lion running straight at you alone in the middle of nowhere, with instinct saying one thing and fear saying another? Would you have run, frozen, hidden? Tell me in the comments, because everyone reacts differently, and understanding that helps us understand ourselves better. And if this story kept you hooked till the end, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, then hit the like button, subscribe to the Victims of Nature channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Oh, and just to be clear, okay, this story is a work of fiction. Everything here was created with the goal of entertaining, moving, and provoking reflection. Do not try to replicate anything similar if you ever find yourself in a comparable situation. Nature is beautiful, but it's also unpredictable and dangerous. If you're going to explore, always do it with qualified guides, follow safety rules, and respect the animal's space. The adventure can be unforgettable, but life is one of a kind. Take care of it.